right, so we're diving deep into some prophecies. You ready for this?
Always.
Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of YouTube videos about this German guy, Alois Irlmaier. And yeah, he was supposedly this, like, I don't know, kind of prophet guy back in the 1950s.
Mhm.
And they say he predicted things like the Berlin Wall, even cell phones.
It's pretty wild stuff. What I find so interesting about him is that he wasn't like, some kind of, I don't know, like a monk in a cave or something. This guy was a dowser.
What's that?
Yeah, he was a dowser, so he like found water.
Oh, like for wells and stuff?
Exactly. He would find the best places to dig wells. And somehow he also had these visions of the future.
So it's not like he was like, study the stars or anything. He was just this regular guy who found water, and then bam, he starts talking about the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, and people were saying he was predicting all sorts of major events, even issuing warnings during the war, apparently.
Really? Like what kind of warnings?
Well, one of the videos we have talks about how he warned people about bombing raids. And he was apparently so accurate that he was actually sued by a priest.
A priest? Why would a priest sue him?
The priest accused him of profiteering from his prophecies, basically saying he was making money off of people's fear.
Oh, wow.
But the case was dismissed because witnesses came forward and said that Irlmaier's predictions had actually saved their lives during the bombings.
So they actually listened to him and took shelter or something?
Yeah, apparently. So even back then, people were taking his predictions seriously.
So, okay, what else did he predict?
Well, one of the big ones, and they talk about this in a lot of the videos, is that he predicted a huge economic upswing after World War II.
Especially in Germany, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, as we know, totally happened.
Yeah, the whole German economic miracle in the 60s and 70s.
Exactly. It's like he saw that coming decades earlier.
Okay, but here's the thing that kind of freaks me out. He also said that this economic boom would lead to, let me find the quote here, he called it widespread moral corruption. Like, it's not all sunshine and roses,
That's so interesting, isn't it? It's like he was saying that material wealth doesn't necessarily lead to happiness or, morality.
Right, it's like, hey, be careful what you wish for, kind of.
And that idea has been around for centuries. Like you see it in literature, philosophy, all over the place.
Yeah, it's that whole money can't buy happiness thing.
Exactly. So it's not just some random prediction. It's like he was tapping into this deeper human concern about, the downsides of material wealth.
Like there's always a trade-off. Like we get all this cool stuff in technology, but then maybe we lose something else along the way.
Exactly.
So what else did he see? What other downsides?
Well, another one that really stood out to me was his prediction about a massive influx of foreigners into Germany.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. And, if you look back, it does seem to line up with actual events.
Right. Like the guest worker programs in the 60s and 70s brought a lot of people from other countries to Germany.
And then more recently, you have the whole refugee crisis in 2015.
It's like he saw these demographic shifts coming way before they happened.
Okay, so that's pretty wild. But he didn't just talk about social changes, right? I mean, he also predicted some crazy stuff about the economy and, like, even revolutions.
Oh, yeah. The economic predictions are pretty intense, especially considering what's going on in the world right now.
Like what?
Well, one of the things he talked about was massive inflation.
Oh, no.
Like he said money would basically become worthless.
And that's something a lot of people are worried about these days, right? With everything going on in the world, the economy, it's like, I don't know.
It's definitely a concern. And what's really interesting is that he linked this economic turmoil to social unrest.
Like riots and stuff.
Yeah, he actually predicted revolutions led by young people.
Oh, wow.
And he specifically mentioned violent uprisings in Italy and Paris.
I mean, there have been protests and stuff in those places, but nothing on that scale, right?
Not yet, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider all the tensions and frustrations, that people are feeling around the world.
Especially young people. They're the ones inheriting all these problems,
They are.
So it's like he's painting this picture of a world that's kind of on edge, right?
He is. And then on top of all that, he also predicted a large-scale war.
Oh, man, not another war.
And get this, he said it would likely start in the Middle East, with ships gathering in the Mediterranean.
Now, there's always something going on in the Middle East, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, I guess that's not a huge surprise.
But still, it's pretty unsettling, especially when you consider how interconnected the world is today.
Yeah, like one little spark could set off a chain reaction.
Exactly.
And according to these videos, he didn't just predict the war itself. He also talked about what would happen afterwards.
Right. He mentioned a peace conference. possibly in the Balkans.
Like everyone gets together to try and work things out.
Yeah, but there's a twist. He said that during this peace conference, a high-ranking politician would be assassinated.
Whoa, an assassination. So it's like the peace talks fall apart, and then what?
Well, according to Irlmaier, this assassination would trigger a Russian invasion of northern Germany.
The Russians
Yeah.
invading Germany. That sounds like something out of like a Cold War movie or something.
It does, doesn't it? But that's what he predicted.
So we've got economic collapse, revolutions, a war in the Middle East, and then a Russian invasion of Germany. This is getting pretty dark.
It is, but it gets even darker.
Oh no, what could be darker than all that?
Well, that's where we get to the 3 days of darkness.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that one. That's the one that really creeps me out.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense prediction.
So what exactly did he say would happen?
Well, he described a period of complete darkness lasting for 3 days straight.
Like no sun, no moon, nothing.
Nothing. Just darkness.
And it's not just darkness, right? I mean, he also talked about all kinds of other crazy stuff happening during those 3 days.
Yeah, like extreme cold, storms, earthquakes, the whole 9 yards.
Like the end of the world kind of stuff.
It definitely has that apocalyptic vibe.
And he gave some very specific instructions for how to survive, right?
He did. He said people should stay indoors, seal up all openings, and avoid looking outside.
And pray, right?
Yes, he emphasized the importance of prayer.
It's like he was preparing people for some kind of spiritual test as much as a physical one.
Right, and he was very specific about not opening the door for anyone during those 3 days.
Even if you hear someone you know.
Even then.
That's scary. Like, what could be out there that's so dangerous?
It's definitely a chilling thought, but he was adamant about it.
It's like he saw something truly terrifying. Something that could, I don't know, like, trick people or something.
It's hard to say for sure.
Okay, so we've got economic collapse, revolutions, a war, a Russian invasion, and then this terrifying period of darkness. I need a break.
It's a lot to take in, I know. But Irlmaier didn't just leave us with doom and gloom. He also talked about what would happen after the darkness lifted. And that's where things get really interesting.
Oh, okay, so there's some hope after all this.
Yeah.
Tell me more. Okay, so there's some hope after all this. Tell me more.
Well, he described this world blanketed in a grayish-white layer. And he actually advised people to wait for the first rain before going outside.
Like the rain would be dangerous or something?
He said the rain would cleanse the earth.
That's interesting. It's like this image of the world being purified or something.
Yeah.
Like washing away the old and making way for the new.
Yeah, I get that feeling too. Like the darkness is this necessary purge, and then the rain comes and kind of resets everything.
It's like hitting the reset button on humanity.
Yeah.
But in a good way, right?
Right, because after that, he predicted a period of incredible abundance.
Like how abundant are we talking here?
He talked about abundant harvests, like farmers would have 2 harvests a year.
Wow, 2 harvests. That's crazy. I mean, that would solve a lot of problems, right?
Yeah, it would definitely be a game changer. And it's not just about the food. He also talked about a return to more traditional values.
Like what kind of value?
Well, he emphasized family, community, faith.
So it's like after all the chaos and destruction, people kind of rediscover what's really important.
Yeah, that's the feeling I get from it. It's like humanity goes through this crucible, this really intense period of suffering, and then comes out the other side stronger and more connected.
Like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
It's exactly. But
Yeah.
there's one thing that kind of bugs me about all this.
What's that?
Well, Irlmaier was describing things like cell phones and drones, right?
Way back in the 1950s.
Exactly. And I keep wondering, how could he have even conceived of these things?
Like those technologies didn't even exist back then.
Right. It's like he was looking into a future that was so different from his own time.
I know. It's mind-blowing. And it's not just that he predicted them, it's the way he described them.
Yeah, like he called cell phones metallic cigarette boxes with buttons and said people would talk through them.
It's so funny when you think about it now.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of amazing, you know? Like he was trying to grasp these futuristic concepts with the language of his time.
And then there are the drones.
What did he call them again?
He described them as white doves, larger than birds that could fly without a pilot.
It's almost poetic, isn't it?
It is, and it makes me wonder, was he actually seeing these things literally, or was he just trying to find the best way to describe what he was seeing in his visions?
I mean, I guess we'll never know for sure, but regardless, it's still fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, it's not just about the technology. It's the fact that some of his other predictions, according to these videos, seem to be coming true.
Yeah, like the economic boom, the influx of foreigners into Germany, even the rise of inflation.
It makes you wonder, what if he was right about the other stuff too? Like the 3 days of darkness.
Yeah, that one is definitely hard to shake.
It's such a vivid and terrifying prediction.
I have to admit, there's a part of me that's kind of drawn to it. Like a morbid curiosity, I guess.
I get that. It's like we're both terrified and fascinated by the idea of the apocalypse.
Maybe it's because deep down we know that anything is possible.
Maybe. And maybe it's also a way of confronting our own mortality.
Yeah, like if the world really could end at any moment, what does that mean for us? How should we live our lives?
Those are big questions. And I think it's natural to look for answers in stories, in myths, in prophecies.
Yeah, we're always trying to make sense of the unknown.
And I think Erlmaier's prophecies, whether they're accurate or not, offer a kind of framework for understanding the world.
Like a way of making sense of the chaos.
Exactly. And even if we don't agree with everything he said, I think there's something to be learned from his message.
Like what?
Well, he emphasized the importance of faith, of prayer, of forgiveness.
He also talked about the importance of family and community.
Right? And those are values that are timeless, you know?
Yeah, they're values that can help us through any crisis, whether it's a global pandemic, a war, or even just the everyday struggles of life.
I think so. And you know, there's one more thing I wanted to mention.
What's that?
Well, Irlmaier didn't just talk about the events themselves, he also talked about specific time frames.
Well, yeah, like the 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months.
Exactly. And we haven't really explored that aspect yet.
Oh, yeah, like the 3 weeks and 3 months.
Exactly. And one of the videos actually features a witness who knew Irlmaier personally. And according to this witness, Irlmaier actually clarified that the war itself wouldn't last very long.
The war. The one in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's the one. He apparently said that it would be over relatively quickly.
Huh. That's kind of surprising. I mean, given all the stuff he talked about, you'd think it would drag on for years.
Yeah, you'd think so, right. But apparently he was very specific about it.
So how long did he say it would last?
Well, according to this witness, he specifically told them to prepare their basement with enough supplies for 3 weeks.
3 weeks. That's it.
That's what he said.
So it's like a really intense but short conflict.
That's the impression I get. And he really emphasized the importance of family during this time.
Like sticking together and supporting each other.
Exactly. He even suggested that people might need to use a gun for protection if necessary.
Woo, a gun. That's a bit intense coming from the guy who's all about prayer and forgiveness, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit jarring. Like, on the one hand, he's talking about peace and love. And on the other hand, he's saying you might need to defend yourself with a weapon.
It's like he was acknowledging the harsh realities of the situation. Like, even if you're a good person, you still need to be prepared to protect yourself and your family.
Right. And it makes you wonder about his own state of mind. Like, was he struggling with these visions of violence and destruction? Was it hard for him to reconcile those visions with his own beliefs about peace and forgiveness?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to think about. So, okay, if the war is only supposed to last 3 weeks, where do the 3 days of darkness fit in?
That's the really scary part. He said that the 3 days of darkness would occur during those 3 weeks of war.
Oh, no. So you're in the middle of this global conflict, and then suddenly, boom, total darkness for 3 days straight.
It's like a nightmare on top of a
I
nightmare.
can't even imagine.
And he went into a lot of detail about what it would be like. He described it as an ice-cold night with thunder, lightning, and a massive earthquake that would shake the entire globe.
It's like something out of a disaster movie.
And he was so adamant about those instructions. Stay inside, seal everything up, don't look outside, pray.
It's like he was pleading with people to take it seriously.
He even warned against opening the door for anyone, even if you hear familiar voices calling out.
It's like he was saying that something evil would be out there trying to trick people.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is. So, okay, we've got the war, the darkness, all this terrible stuff. But he did say there would be something good afterwards, right? Like a new beginning.
He did. He talked about this period of incredible abundance and renewal after the darkness lifted.
I remember that. Got 2 harvests a year and everything.
Exactly. It's like the world goes through this intense purification process and then emerges cleansed and renewed.
It's a powerful image. And it makes you wonder if all this talk about the end of the world is really just a way of talking about the end of an era.
Like the end of the way things are now and the beginning of something new and hopefully better.
I like that. So even if all this stuff doesn't literally come true, maybe there's still a message of hope in there.
I think so. And I think it's also a reminder that change is inevitable, whether we like it or not.
And that sometimes even the most difficult challenges can lead to positive outcomes.
Exactly.
It's funny, we've spent all this time talking about Erlmaier's predictions,
Hmm.
the wars, the darkness, the aftermath. But maybe what's even more fascinating is the fact that people are still talking about him today.
Yeah, decades after his death.
What is it about these kinds of stories that captures our imaginations?
I think it's our need to make sense of the unknown. We're always looking for answers, for guidance, for some kind of reassurance that everything will be okay,
And maybe figures like Erlmaier offer us that.
even if it's just a glimpse of hope or a warning to change our ways.
I think that's a great point. And, at the end of the day, whether you believe in prophecies or not, I think there's something to be said for exploring these kinds of ideas.
Yeah, it makes us think, it challenges our assumptions, it forces us to confront the big questions.
Maybe that's enough.
Maybe it is.
Well, thanks for going on this deep dive with me.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe in exploring these prophecies, we've learned something about ourselves along the way.
I think that's always the hope, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And all you listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Alois Irlmaier. And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the unknown.